Hitting drop-offs can be quite a scary thing to do, especially if you're not used to getting into the air. Things can go wrong, but they are loads of fun when you get them right, and they're quite a common feature, especially if you come to bike parks, so it's definitely worth getting drop-offs nailed. So this is how to ride your very first drop-off. Why are drop-offs scary? Well, as soon as they get above a certain size, basically you come towards it and it looks like you're dropping off into oblivion. The trail disappears down there. There's trail in front of you, but you don't know what you're going to do and you're not exactly sure what's going to happen. Also, the thing with drop-offs is sometimes it can go right. Not necessarily planning to, it'll just, you hit it at the right speed, you don't do much and you'll get over it. And then other times it'll go wrong, and if you don't know why it's gone wrong, you can have a big old crash and not really know why you've done it. You can see on this drop-off, it's not the biggest, but you know, it's big enough so you can see where people have been dragging their chain rings and their pedals over top of this, and that can cause problems. So drop-offs aren't necessarily simple. There's definitely a few different techniques you can use to get off them, and there's actually 3 main ways that drop-offs go wrong. The first one is just letting the front wheel drop and it's sending you over the bars, which is definitely probably one of the scariest ways to crash. That horrible feeling of disappearing and just tipping over. Second one is, as you've seen on here, is letting the front wheel drop and then the bike stalling. When it hits the bottom, it sort of sumps out, we call it. The bike will stop, you'll lose your momentum and things can go wrong then. The third one is not using the correct technique to lift the front wheel and things going a bit sideways. So let's start to look at how to ride a drop-off. So step one, obviously start small. There's no shame in just practicing on something really small. I actually think a curb is probably the best bet. So although this is probably only, a 1.5 foot, you can still see where pedals have been dragged over top of that. So obviously it's just less risky, but also you could get this wrong and ride out. Whereas with a bigger drop off, you're just in the air for longer, you're gonna land harder. There's way more chance of you getting it slightly wrong and actually having a big crash. So start small, get it right. Just imagine if you do nothing, ride this, do nothing, your front wheel is gonna drop, and yes, you're gonna get away with it probably, if you don't drag your pedal like I did then. You're probably just gonna roll through it. But now you can just repeat this over and over and practice trying to land 2 wheels at the same time. And then it's the same technique for going up and do bigger drop-offs as well. Like I say, it's much better to get it wrong here. And you probably look less stupid as well than just going straight to a massive drop-off, getting it wrong and having a big crash. With the drop-off, what I'm really aiming to do is match the angle of the landing with my bike. So like this, I'm dropping off to flat pretty much. I'll just get both wheels out and flat and land both at the same time. That's just the safest way of learning to do it, especially. Because if you let the front wheel drop, sometimes you get away with it, but if it's much bigger than this, you can land heavy and all the weight starts going towards the bars, and that can be a big cause of crashes. And it's not necessarily actually getting the drop off really wrong, it's then being out of control when you land and then hitting something that causes a big crash. So what I'm trying to do to make my bike land 2 wheels at the same time, it kind of differs depending on how fast I'm going. If I come into this drop off with a lot of speed, just all that momentum is going to keep my front wheel up, and that is the easiest way of doing it. Of course, there's a bit more risk to that because I'm going faster, so there's things I can hit on the way out, but dealing with a drop-off like that is the easiest way. When you're going slower, now you have to start putting some input into the bike to keep that front wheel up. And the first easiest way of doing that is thinking about sliding the bike forward. And what I mean by sliding the bike forward is really riding in towards the drop-off in my neutral position, ready. And as I get right to the edge, I push the bike forward and I end up with my sort of hands out straight in front of me, heels down, weight to the back of the bike. And it's just that slight sort of sliding motion gives me enough momentum to keep that front wheel up and land 2 wheels at the same time. Sliding the bike forward and getting your weight to the back of the bike is a really simple technique, but it can take a little bit of practice. So the best way to make sure you've nailed this is to ask somebody to film you or film yourself using your GoPro, and make sure you end up in the good position of heels down, arms straight out and head up. That technique works really well for small to medium sized drop-offs, and I think that's something that every mountain biker should learn, because eventually, even if you're riding the most mellow trails, you will find yourself probably coming across a drop-off and you'll have to do something. Moving on to the next techniques is only really for sort of intermediate to advanced riders, but just get that one nailed first. Right, so moving up the scale now for drop-offs. Again, this is not the hugest drop-off you'll find in a bike park, but there's much more chance for it to go wrong. And it's also more technical, so you've got a rougher run-in, that's like the transitions change as well, so you don't quite know what's going to happen to your speed as you're coming in. But also on the way out, you've got a berm, you've got some rocks, so there's much more chance for it to go, if it does go wrong, basically, it hurt a bit more. So, same technique, make sure you've got it nailed on the small drop off, because now you might not be able to judge your speed perfectly, and if you get it wrong, you can't just rely on sliding that bike forward or that extra speed with just the momentum to keep the front wheel up. Now, if you lose your speed here for any reason, like you clip your pedal or something goes slightly wrong, you're going to need a good manual technique to keep that front wheel up. This is definitely big enough to drag the bottom of your bike and potentially go over the bars, and that'd be bad news. So this is the perfect chance to now get practicing your manuals if you're going to go on and do bigger and more technical drop-offs. So this drop-off is actually on a red trail. We're here at Bike Park Wales, and it's pretty typical of a British red trail is to find drop-offs of that size. In a second, we're going to move on to a black drop-off. So I think definitely if you're looking to ride these sort of trails, it's really worth having the manual in the bag, because like I said, if you don't get your speed quite right, you're going to need to have that technique to lift the front wheel. So let's look at how to do that. If you're completely new to manualing, then have a little search on our YouTube page. We've done loads of how-tos, but really this is a bit of a tricky skill, especially for beginners to learn. You've got to be covering the back brake, because when you do get the timing right for this, you'll find the front wheel does pop up, but it takes a lot of practice, got to say. Starting in your ready position, do it in slow motion to begin with. It's all about going down to the bike and then back. Get that in one smooth motion, and it pops the front wheel. But the tricky thing is really getting that motion in one. So down and then back. So down is the pump, back is basically the slide that you've already been doing. One single motion, front wheel should start popping up, but check out our other videos and really practice that. So moving it up to a black level drop off now, I definitely don't recommend you doing this if this video is how to do your first drop off. This shouldn't be your first drop off. It's pretty big. It's pretty scary, to be fair. Coming in, it's slow, it's kind of steppy, and then you drop off, like sheer drop to oblivion, long drop afterwards, but same technique. So really get that manual nailed, ride those small drops over and over until you're matching the landing. Hopefully then your confidence will build. And I just wanted to show you that basically it's the same technique on this as well, but that manual can still go wrong, and I promise you it will go wrong if you're learning. So the main way it goes wrong is if it goes a little bit sideways, which it did for me actually a little bit because the wind caught me, but one of the main reasons for a manual going sideways is using your arms too much and pulling. So like I said, check out those manuals how-tos that we've done before, and make sure that the final position of that should be the same as your slide. So your arms are straight, but it shouldn't go sideways then, because if it does go sideways off a drop like this, like I say, big consequences, but I'll show you the bigger drop off. This is actually a really good example of where using a manual is actually the best way of doing this drop off, because the easiest way is, like I say, throwing a bit of speed and sliding the bike forward. But if you do that here, you're turning like a 4-foot drop off into a 10-foot drop off. If you land down there, it's going to be pretty gnarly. So it's just better to roll in slow and use a bit of a manual and land somewhere up here where it's a much smaller drop off. Right, there's some tips on how to ride your very first drop off. like I say, often it's just not getting it quite right, but it's the run out that causes most issues for a lot of people. Back in my coaching days, I saw most crashes actually after the drop off, not on the drop off. So practice those basics, get them nailed. And we've got way more videos. If you want to move on your drop offs, but getting bigger and more technical, then like I say, hit that search button on GMBN YouTube. We've done loads of videos on that. Good luck, have a go. It's really good fun. And yeah, leave us in the comments down below if you're attempting your first drop off.